A quiet afternoon at a neighborhood coffee shop takes an unexpected turn when one accusation spirals out of control. How far can prejudice go, and will the truth prevail? Stay with us to witness a story that will leave you questioning everything. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know, what would you do in this situation? Lauren, a young African-American woman, adjusted her laptop bag as she stepped into the neighborhood coffee shop. She worked remotely as a software developer for a well-known tech company, and although her home office was comfortable, the monotony of working in the same space every day often weighed on her. Today, she decided to try something different. An afternoon of productivity in the cozy atmosphere of the coffee shop just a few blocks from her apartment. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of conversation greeted her as she pushed open the door. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm light on the wooden tables and mismatched chairs. She approached the counter, smiled at the barista, and ordered a latte. After paying, she scanned the room for a suitable seat. The table by the window, bathed in natural light, Lauren placed her laptop bag on the table and settled in. She pulled out her sleek laptop, a recent purchase she had saved up for after months of hard work. Its metallic surface gleamed under the sunlight, a small reminder of her achievements and dedication to her career. Taking a sip of her latte, she opened her computer and began typing, the sounds of her keystrokes blending seamlessly with the cafe's background noise. Time passed as Lauren lost herself in her work. She updated lines of code, responded to emails, and joined a virtual meeting, her focus undisturbed by the occasional chatter around her. The coffee shop's atmosphere provided the change of pace she needed, and she felt a sense, however, she couldn't ignore the subtle feeling of being watched. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a white woman sitting a few tables away with a young boy, likely her son. The woman was glancing in Lauren's direction repeatedly, her expression shifting between curiosity and suspicion. Lauren tried to dismiss it, assuming it was just idle glances from a stranger. She focused on her screen, determined not to. Moments later, the woman rose from her seat and approached Lauren. Her footsteps were deliberate, and her expression was stern. Lauren glanced up, startled, as the woman stopped. "Excuse me," the woman began, her tone sharp. "Where did you get that laptop?" Lauren blinked, unsure of how to respond to the abrupt question. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked politely, her fingers hovering over T. T. Lauren's chest tightened as the words hit her. She straightened her posture, her initial shock giving way to calm resolve. "This is my laptop," she replied firmly, meeting the woman's accusatory gaze. The woman crossed her arms, her voice growing louder. "Oh, really? Because my son had a laptop just like that stolen not long ago, and I find it hard to believe someone from around here could afford such." Lauren's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her composure. "I'm sorry about your son's laptop," she said, her tone steady, "but this is mine. I have receipts and proof of purchase if you need them. Please leave me alone." The woman scoffed, her voice escalating further. "I don't believe you. This isn't right. I'm calling someone to handle this." Without waiting for a response, she turned and marched toward the counter, leaving Lauren stunned and embarrassed. Lauren glanced around, noticing that several patrons were now looking in her direction, their murmurs creating a low hum of unease. She took a deep breath and tried to focus on her screen, but the sense of intrusion and injustice gnawed at her. Her mind raced as she tried to anticipate what the woman might do next. At the counter, the woman spoke animatedly to the cafe's manager, gesturing in Lauren's direction. Lauren caught fragments of the conversation. stolen laptop, suspicious behavior, needs to be handled. The manager, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, nodded and followed the woman back to Lauren's table. Lauren looked up as they approached, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ma'am," the manager said, his tone neutral but concerned, "this woman is saying there's an issue with your laptop. Can you explain what's going on?" Lauren swallowed her frustration and forced herself to respond calmly. "There's no issue," she said. "This is my laptop. She's accusing me of stealing it without any evidence." The woman interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "She stole it from my son. I'm sure of it. People like her always find ways to take what doesn't belong to them." The manager's expression flickered with discomfort, and he looked at Lauren. "Do you have any way to verify that this laptop is yours?" Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the woman exclaimed, "This needs to be reported. Call the police." Lauren's chest tightened again, and her mind reeled at the absurdity of the situation. She glanced at the manager and then at the woman, whose smug expression only fueled her resolve. "Go ahead," Lauren said, her voice firm but steady. "Call them. I have nothing to hide." The woman smirked, pulling out her phone and stepping aside to make the call. Lauren sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process the situation. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but the humiliation and injustice of being falsely accused weighed heavily on her. As the woman spoke animatedly into her phone, the other patrons whispered among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with what was unfolding. Lauren caught the sympathetic gaze of a man sitting nearby, but he quickly looked away as if unsure how to intervene. Lauren closed her laptop and folded her hands on the table, preparing herself for what was to come. She didn't know how the situation would unfold, but she resolved to stand her ground and prove her innocence. As Lauren sat at her table, her hands trembling slightly from the encounter, she tried to maintain her composure. She opened her laptop again, hoping to focus on her work, but the lingering unease made it impossible. She felt the stares of other patrons, some curious, others judgmental, as if they were already forming opinions based solely on the woman's accusations. The coffee shop's warm and inviting atmosphere now felt cold and suffocating. The woman, now standing near the counter after making her call, glanced back at Lauren with a self-satisfied smirk. Lauren tried to ignore her, but the weight of the accusation made her stomach churn. How could someone be so quick to judge, to assume guilt without any evidence? She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, and tried to remind herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. Moments later, the woman returned to her seat with her son, still keeping an eye on Lauren. She leaned toward the boy, whispering something, and he nodded solemnly. Lauren caught bits of their conversation. "We'll get it back. Don't worry, honey." The boy's wide-eyed gaze briefly met Lauren's, and she saw a mix of confusion and discomfort in his expression. The tension in the coffee shop was palpable. The soft hum of conversation had dwindled, and the occasional clink of cups felt louder than usual. Lauren noticed a few patrons shifting in their seats, unsure whether to involve themselves or stay out of it. A man seated a few tables away glanced at her, then quickly looked down at his phone. No one spoke up or challenged the woman's claims. The manager approached Lauren's table again, this time with an apologetic look. "Ma'am, I just want to make sure everything is all right. I don't want any trouble here." Lauren looked up at him, forcing a small, polite smile despite the knot in her stomach. "I understand," she said calmly. "But as I told you earlier, this is my laptop. I've done nothing wrong." The woman, sitting just a few feet away, interjected loudly. Of course, she's going to say that. Thieves don't admit what they've done. You'll see when the police get here. Lauren's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her tone measured. I've offered to show proof that this laptop belongs to me. I don't understand why my word isn't enough. The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He glanced at the woman, then back at Lauren. Let's just wait for the authorities to sort this out, he said, his voice placating. Lauren sighed and nodded, leaning back in her chair. She knew that staying calm was her best option, but the humiliation of being accused so publicly weighed on her. She glanced out the window, watching cars pass by, and tried to center herself. 10 minutes later, the sound of police sirens broke through the quiet tension in the shop. The woman perked up, her face lighting with satisfaction. Finally, she muttered under her breath as she stood up and waved toward the officers entering the cafe. 2 uniformed officers walked in, their expressions neutral as they scanned the room. The woman immediately approached them, her voice loud and indignant. Officers, thank goodness you're here. That woman, she said, pointing directly at Lauren, stole my son's laptop. She's sitting over there with it right now. Lauren felt every eye in the cafe turn toward her. Her throat tightened, but she steadied herself and rose from her seat, her laptop closed and resting on the table in front of her. One of the officers raised a hand, gesturing for the woman to calm down. Ma'am, we'll take it from here. Please step aside for a moment. He turned to Lauren, his tone even. Miss, would you mind telling us what's going on? Lauren met his gaze, her voice steady but firm. Of course. This is my laptop. I've been working here for the past hour when this woman approached me, accusing me of stealing it. I've told her it's mine and even offered to show proof of purchase, but she insists otherwise. The second officer looked at the woman. Do you have any evidence to support your claim, ma'am? The woman crossed her arms, her voice filled with conviction. I don't need evidence. My son had a laptop just like that stolen recently, and it's obvious that someone like her couldn't afford it. Look at her. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. The first officer turned back to Lauren. Miss, do you have any way to verify that this laptop is yours? Lauren nodded. I can show you the receipt, serial number, or even log into my work system to confirm it's mine. But there's an easier way to resolve this, she said, her voice calm but pointed. This cafe has security cameras. The footage will show that I walked in with this laptop. The woman's confident expression faltered for a brief moment, her eyes darting toward the manager. Cameras? Are those even working? She asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. The manager cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. Our cameras are operational. He looked at the officers. I can show you the footage right now, if that helps. The lead officer nodded. Please do. He gestured for Lauren and the woman to remain seated while he followed the manager to the back of the cafe. Lauren folded her hands in her lap, her heart pounding but her face calm. She glanced at the woman, whose smug demeanor was starting to crack. The boy sat silently beside her, looking down at the floor. Several minutes later, the officers returned. The lead officer's expression was firm as he addressed the woman. Ma'am, we reviewed the footage. It clearly shows this young lady entering the cafe with her laptop. Your claims are unfounded. The woman's face flushed, her bravado crumbling. There must be some mistake, she stammered. I mean, it's still possible. The officer cut her off. Ma'am, making false accusations and wasting police resources is a serious matter. We're going to need you to come with us. The woman's mouth opened and closed, her indignation replaced by panic. She looked around the room, seeking sympathy, but found only cold stares. Lauren exhaled deeply, relief washing over her. As the officers escorted the woman out of the cafe, her son trailing behind, the room fell silent. Patrons exchanged glances, and a few murmured words of support reached Lauren's ears. She looked up at the manager, who approached her with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry for everything you went through," he said. "If there's anything I can do to make it right, please let me know." Lauren managed a small smile. "Thank you. I appreciate it." As she gathered her belongings, the weight of the experience began to lift. She knew she had done nothing wrong, and the truth had prevailed. But the sting of being falsely accused would linger. Still, she walked out of the cafe with her head held high, determined not to let the incident define her. Lauren sat back in her chair, watching as the two officers, followed by the coffee shop manager, disappeared into the back to review the security footage. The tension in the cafe was almost unbearable. Murmurs swirled among the patrons, their glances darting between Lauren and the woman who had accused her. The woman sat stiffly in her seat, her son beside her, his head bowed. Lauren could see her tapping her fingers nervously against the table, her once confident expression now betraying flashes of uncertainty. Lauren took a deep breath and tried to focus on the facts. She knew the truth was on her side, and the security footage would clear her name. Still, the humiliation of being publicly accused lingered, gnawing at her. She resisted the urge to defend herself further in front of the other patrons, knowing that anything she said now would likely be met with skepticism or indifference. The silence was broken by the woman, who leaned slightly toward Lauren, her voice just loud enough for her to hear. "You know, you don't have to make this worse for yourself. If you just admit what you did, they might go easy on you. People like you always think you can get away with things, but not this time." Lauren turned to her, her expression calm but firm. "People like me," she said, her voice steady. "You have no idea who I am or what I've worked for. And if you think I'm going to let you walk all over me with baseless accusations, you're mistaken." The woman scoffed, sitting back in her chair and crossing her arms. "We'll see about that," she muttered. A few more minutes passed, though it felt like an eternity. The coffee shop seemed to grow quieter with each passing second, as if everyone was holding their breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Lauren glanced at the door leading to the back, willing the officers to return with the proof she needed to end this nightmare. Finally, the officers reappeared, their expressions serious. The lead officer walked toward Lauren's table, his eyes briefly scanned the room before settling on her. Behind him, the manager followed, his face a mixture of relief and quiet frustration. "Miss," the officer said, his tone neutral but firm, "we've reviewed the footage. It clearly shows you entering the cafe with your laptop. There's no evidence to support the claims made against you." Lauren let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The vindication was immediate, but it didn't erase the sting of the ordeal. She nodded, her voice steady but quiet. "Thank you, officer." The woman shot to her feet, her voice rising in pitch. "That can't be right. You must have missed something. She must have stolen it before coming here." The second officer stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Ma'am, the footage is clear. This laptop belongs to her. Your accusations are unfounded, and you've wasted police resources by making a false report." The woman's face flushed, her bravado crumbling. She looked around the room, seeking some form of support, but found none. The other patrons averted their eyes or watched in silence, their expressions ranging from discomfort to disapproval. "This is ridiculous," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I was just trying to do the right thing for my son. She doesn't need a laptop like that anyway." The lead officer's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, you need to understand the seriousness of what you've done. False accusations and wasting police time are not minor offenses. We're going to need you to step outside with us." The woman's eyes widened, her indignation replaced by panic. "Wait, you're arresting me? For what? I was just trying to help." The officer gestured toward the door. "Ma'am, please come with us. We'll discuss this further at the station." The woman hesitated, her gaze darting between the officer and Lauren. For a moment, it seemed like she might resist, but then she grabbed her son's hand and followed the officers toward the exit. As she passed Lauren, she shot her a glare filled with frustration and something else, perhaps embarrassment or regret. As the door closed behind them, a heavy silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, the quiet murmur of conversation resumed. A few patrons exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, while others turned back to their drinks or laptops, eager to put the incident behind them. The manager approached Lauren's table, his hands clasped in front of him. "Miss, I want to personally apologize for everything that just happened. I should have stepped in sooner, but, well, I hope you understand." Lauren looked up at him, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I understand this wasn't your fault, but it doesn't make it any easier to deal with." The manager nodded, looking genuinely regretful. "If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know. Your next coffee is on the house, at the very least." Lauren managed a small smile, though the weight of the experience still pressed heavily on her. "I appreciate that," she said, closing her laptop and slipping it into her bag. As she stood to leave, she noticed a few patrons watching her, their faces a mix of sympathy and something else, perhaps guilt for not stepping in sooner. Lauren held her head high, refusing to let their silence diminish her sense of self-worth. She walked out of the cafe, the afternoon sunlight warm on her skin. Despite the vindication, she couldn't shake the lingering discomfort of being falsely accused, of having her integrity questioned because of someone else's prejudice. But as she moved down the sidewalk, she reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong, and the truth had prevailed. The experience had been a painful reminder of the biases she still faced, but it also reaffirmed her strength and resilience. She resolved to channel her frustration into something constructive, to continue proving, if only to herself, that she was more than capable of rising above the ignorance and prejudice of others. Lauren stepped out of the coffee shop, her shoulders heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The sunlight felt warmer than usual, but instead of comfort, it brought an unwelcome intensity, as if the world outside was scrutinizing her as closely as the patrons had inside. She clutched her laptop bag tightly, her steps slow as she tried to process the surreal series of events that had unfolded. The injustice of the accusation gnawed at her. No matter how calmly she had handled the situation, or how soundly the evidence had exonerated her, the sting of being judged based on nothing but prejudice lingered. Her mind replayed the woman's words. "Someone like you doesn't need a laptop like that." The condescension, the certainty in the woman's voice, it all made her stomach churn. She walked a few blocks before realizing she couldn't go straight home. Her apartment, though her sanctuary, now felt like a space too confining for the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Instead, she found a bench in a nearby park and sat down, her hands resting on her lap. Around her, children laughed and played, their carefree energy a sharp contrast to her mood. Lauren closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the sounds of the park ground her. She thought back to the woman's son, the way he had looked at her with a mixture of confusion and unease. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, far too young to fully grasp the implications of his mother's actions, yet his silence during the ordeal had spoken volumes. Was he embarrassed, conflicted, or was he simply too scared to question the narrative his mother had constructed? The thought lingered, and Lauren found herself wondering how many more children were being taught to see the world through the same narrow lens. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest, not just for herself, but for the broader fight against the biases and stereotypes that still poison society. She pulled out her phone and opened a blank note. Writing had always been her way of sorting through her thoughts, of making sense of the senseless. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she began typing. Today, I was accused of stealing my own property, not because of anything I did, but because of who I am and what I represent to certain people. This is not the first time I've faced prejudice, and it likely won't be the last. But today was different. Today, I was reminded of the importance of standing firm in the face of ignorance and hate, not just for myself, but for those who come after me. Her words spilled out faster than she expected, each one bringing a measure of clarity and release. She detailed the events of the day not as a way to relive the humiliation, but to document the reality of her experience. She wrote about the woman's assumptions, the police's initial skepticism, and the vindication brought by the security footage. She ended with a call to action, not for others, but for herself, to continue finding strength and grace even in moments of adversity. When she finished, she reread the note, her resolve solidifying with each line. She didn't know yet if she would share it publicly, but the act of writing had already done its work. She felt lighter, more grounded, as if she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her day. As she sat on the bench, she noticed a woman walking toward her with a young child in tow. For a brief moment, her chest tightened, the memory of the coffee shop flashing in her mind. But this woman simply smiled, her child tugging at her hand impatiently. Lauren smiled back, the tension in her chest easing. She rose from the bench, deciding it was time to head home. Her steps were more purposeful now, her grip on her laptop bag less tense. The day wasn't over, and she refused to let it be defined by one person's prejudice. She reminded herself that for every moment of ignorance she faced, there was an opportunity to rise above it, to show herself and others what resilience looked like. As she walked, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Maya. "How's the coffee shop life?" the message read, accompanied by a laughing emoji. Lauren hesitated for a moment before responding. "It's a long story. Let's talk later." She added a winking emoji to lighten the tone, knowing Maya would press for details the moment they spoke. When she finally reached her apartment, the familiar comfort of her space embraced her. She set her laptop on her desk and stood for a moment, taking in the quiet. Then, with a renewed sense of purpose, she sat down and opened her laptop. Her work awaited her, and she was determined to tackle it with the same focus and determination she always had. The events of the day had shaken her, but they hadn't broken her. Lauren knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew she had the strength to face them. Today was just one chapter in a much larger story, and she intended to write the rest on her own terms. Lauren's apartment felt like both a refuge and a reminder of the day's events. The familiar surroundings should have comforted her, but the lingering tension from the coffee shop made it hard to relax. She set her laptop on the dining table and poured herself a glass of water. The coolness of the liquid grounded her as she tried to process everything. The confrontation, the accusations, and the looks of the other patrons all played on a loop in her mind. Determined not to let the incident consume her entire day, Lauren returned to her laptop. She opened her work files, deciding to dive into the coding project that had been her original focus before everything spiraled. The rhythmic clacking of keys offered a sense of normalcy, a routine she could control. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to concentrate, the woman's words echoed in her thoughts. Someone like you doesn't need a laptop like that. The statement was a cruel distillation of assumptions she had encountered throughout her life. It wasn't the first time her achievements had been questioned, but this was the most blatant and public example she'd faced in a long time. It stung not because she doubted herself, but because it highlighted how deeply rooted those biases were in society. A notification on her phone broke her concentration. It was a message from Maya. "Are you okay? Your earlier text sounded off. Call me when you're free." Lauren stared at the screen for a moment before deciding to call her best friend. As the phone rang, she leaned back in her chair, trying to find the words to explain what had happened. "Hey!" Maya's voice was cheerful at first, but it quickly shifted to concern. "What's going on? You sounded weird earlier." Lauren hesitated before diving into the story. She recounted everything: the woman's accusation, the arrival of the police, the review of the security footage, and the eventual vindication. As she spoke, she could hear Maya's sharp intake of breath and occasional muttered exclamations of disbelief. "That's insane," Maya said when Lauren finished. "I can't believe that woman had the audacity to say something like that. And in public, she wasn't even embarrassed to show how ignorant she was." Lauren let out a humorless laugh. If anything, she seemed proud of herself at first, like she thought she was doing the world a favor by calling me out. Maya's tone hardened. "People like that are the worst. They walk around with all this entitlement, thinking they can police the lives of others. I'm just glad you kept your cool. I don't know if I could have done the same." "It wasn't easy," Lauren admitted. "I kept telling myself that losing my temper would only make things worse. But it was exhausting, Maya. The worst part is knowing that no matter how many times I prove myself, there will always be people who assume the worst about me." Maya was silent for a moment, and Lauren could picture her friend pacing, trying to come up with the right words. "You're stronger than most people I know," Maya finally said. "The fact that you handled it with grace says a lot about who you are. That woman? She's the one who looked like a fool in the end, and she got what she deserved." Lauren nodded, even though Maya couldn't see her. "Yeah, I guess so. It's just hard to shake the feeling of being, I don't know, dehumanized. Like I wasn't even a person to her, just a stereotype she thought she recognized." "You're not a stereotype, Lauren," Maya said firmly, "and anyone who takes the time to know you would see that immediately. Don't let one ignorant woman define your day, or your worth." They talked a little longer, Maya doing her best to lighten the mood with stories about her day. By the time they hung up, Lauren felt a little better. Talking to her best friend had reminded her that she wasn't alone, that there were people in her life who valued and understood her. Feeling more grounded, Lauren decided to take a break from work. She opened her laptop and revisited the note she had started earlier in the park. As she reread her words, she realized she wanted to share her experience, not for sympathy, but to shed light on the kind of casual prejudice that so many people faced. She logged into her social media account and began typing. She recounted the events of the day in clear, concise language, focusing on how it felt to be falsely accused and the importance of standing firm in the face of ignorance. She ended the post with a message of resilience and hope. This kind of prejudice isn't new, and sadly, it won't be the last time I face it. But every time it happens, I'm reminded of the strength it takes to fight back, not with anger, but with truth. I hope that by sharing this, others will feel less alone when they face similar moments. We're stronger together, and we have to keep pushing for a world where these assumptions and biases no longer hold power. Lauren hesitated for a moment before hitting post. Almost immediately, the notifications started rolling in. Likes, comments, and shares from friends and acquaintances who were appalled by what had happened but inspired by her strength. The outpouring of support lifted a weight from Lauren's chest. While the day had started with frustration and humiliation, it was ending with solidarity and empowerment. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew, but for now she felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had turned a painful experience into something meaningful, not just for herself, but for others who might need to hear her story. The next morning, Lauren woke up with a strange mix of emotions. The events of the previous day were still fresh in her mind, but the overwhelming response to her social media post gave her a sense of validation she hadn't anticipated. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some from friends expressing their outrage and support, others from acquaintances sharing their own stories of facing prejudice. The comments section was filled with a mix of solidarity and disbelief at the injustice she had endured. Lauren scrolled through the messages as she sipped her morning coffee, feeling both comforted and a little overwhelmed. The number of strangers who had shared or commented on her post was staggering. Many thanked her for speaking up, saying her story resonated deeply with their own experiences. Others offered words of encouragement, reminding her that her strength and composure were an inspiration. One comment in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Maria, who identified herself as a former teacher and shared how she had faced similar baseless accusations because of her ethnicity. Maria wrote, "Your story is a reminder of how much work we still have to do as a society. Thank you for standing tall and sharing your truth. You give me hope for a better future." Lauren reread the comment several times, her chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and sadness. She hadn't expected her story to resonate so widely, but it was a stark reminder of how common these experiences were for people from marginalized communities. As she set her phone aside, Lauren resolved to channel this newfound energy into something productive. She pulled out her laptop, not to work on her coding projects, but to start researching organizations and initiatives focused on combating systemic bias and promoting equity. If her story had sparked a conversation, she wanted to make sure it contributed to something larger than herself. Hours passed as Lauren immersed herself in articles, forums, and social media pages. She discovered groups advocating for policy changes, community workshops aimed at breaking down stereotypes, and mentorship programs designed to empower underrepresented youth. The more she read, the more inspired she felt. By mid-afternoon, Lauren had compiled a list of organizations she wanted to reach out to. She drafted a few emails, introducing herself and explaining her recent experience. She offered to volunteer her time or skills, whether it was helping with social media campaigns or mentoring young women entering the tech industry. As she typed, She couldn't help but think about the boy who had been with the woman at the coffee shop. His silence during the ordeal had stuck with her. She wondered what he thought of the situation now, whether he had questioned his mother's actions or simply accepted them as truth. The idea that he might grow up internalizing those same prejudices made her stomach turn. She paused mid-sentence, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, almost instinctively, she opened a new document and began drafting a letter, not to the boy directly, but to children like him. "To the next generation," she wrote, "I hope you grow up in a world that teaches you to see people for who they truly are, not for the assumptions others make about them. I hope you learn to question bias and embrace diversity, understanding that our differences make us stronger. And I hope you never feel the need to diminish someone else to lift yourself up." The words came easily, flowing from a place of deep conviction. When she finished, Lauren read the letter aloud, feeling a sense of catharsis. She wasn't sure what she would do with it yet. Maybe post it online, maybe save it for another time. But it felt good to put her thoughts into words. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lauren finally closed her laptop. She stretched, feeling a mix of exhaustion and accomplishment. The day hadn't gone as planned, but it had been productive in a way that felt deeply meaningful. Later that evening, Maya called to check in. "I saw your post," Maya said. "It's blowing up. You're basically a local celebrity now." Lauren laughed, though the idea of being in the spotlight made her a little uneasy. "I'm glad people are talking about it. If it makes even one person think twice about their assumptions, it's worth it." Maya's tone softened. "You're doing something important, Lauren. You took something awful and turned it into something positive. That's not easy to do." "Thanks, Maya," Lauren said, her voice warm. "I just hope it leads to real change." They talked for a while longer, their conversation drifting to lighter topics. By the time they hung up, Lauren felt a renewed sense of purpose. Before heading to bed, she checked her email and saw a response from one of the organizations she had reached out to. The message was brief but encouraging. "We'd love to work with you. Let's schedule a call to discuss how you can get involved." Lauren smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and determination. The events of the past day had been painful and exhausting, but they had also opened doors she hadn't expected. She was ready to step through them, ready to turn her experience into action. As she climbed into bed, she thought about the journey ahead. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But for the first time in a while, she felt a sense of clarity about her place in the fight for justice and equality. She closed her eyes, her mind already buzzing with ideas for what she would do next. The next morning, Lauren woke up feeling lighter than she had in days. The outpouring of support from her community, friends and strangers alike, had reminded her that she was not alone in her experiences. Though the memory of the confrontation in the coffee shop still stung, it no longer defined her. Instead, it became a catalyst for action, a moment she could point to as the start of something bigger. As she sat at her dining table with her morning coffee, her phone buzzed with notifications. The post she had shared continued to circulate, drawing responses from people all over the country. Some messages were heartfelt, thanking her for her bravery and resilience. Others shared similar stories, each one a painful reminder of how common such experiences were. One comment, however, caught her attention. It was from a woman who claimed to know the person who had accused Lauren in the coffee shop. The comment read, "I can't believe she did that. She's always been judgmental, but this is too far. I hope this teaches her a lesson about assumptions." Lauren hesitated before responding. She didn't want to dwell on the woman who had accused her, but the comment reminded her that everyone involved in the incident had their own story, including the young boy who had sat silently beside his mother. The boy's face came to her mind again, his wide eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. He had been a bystander to his mother's actions, absorbing everything without saying a word. Lauren wondered how he had processed what happened and whether it would shape his understanding of the world in the future. Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Lauren opened her laptop and revisited the letter she had started writing the day before. She read through her words, tweaking a few sentences to make them more personal and direct. When she finished, she felt a sense of closure. This letter wasn't just for the boy in the coffee shop. It was for anyone who had ever felt the weight of judgment or the pain of being misunderstood. Satisfied with the draft, Lauren saved the letter and closed her laptop. She decided she would share it eventually, but for now, it was enough to know it existed. Later that afternoon, she received an email from one of the organizations she had contacted, a mentorship program focused on empowering young people from underrepresented backgrounds. They were excited to collaborate and had invited her to speak at an upcoming event. The idea of standing in front of a crowd and sharing her story made her nervous, but Lauren knew it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. The event was scheduled for the following week, giving her just enough time to prepare. She spent hours drafting her speech, carefully balancing her personal experience with broader lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of challenging prejudice. On the day of the event, Lauren stood backstage, clutching her notes. The sound of voices drifting in from the audience filled her with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was there. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating a space where others could feel seen and heard. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage to a round of applause. The room was filled with young faces, their eyes filled with curiosity and hope. Lauren began her speech by recounting the incident at the coffee shop, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "I could have walked away feeling defeated," she said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "But instead, I chose to speak up, not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever been judged unfairly or made to feel like they don't belong. Our voices matter, and when we use them, we create change." Her words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. As she continued, she shared the lessons she had learned from the experience, the importance of self-advocacy, the power of community, and the need to confront biases, both in others and within ourselves. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Lauren felt a wave of relief and pride as she stepped off the stage. A line of people formed to speak with her, each one eager to share their thoughts or ask questions. Among them was a young boy who looked to be around the same age as the one from the coffee shop. He approached her shyly, clutching a notebook. "I liked your speech," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It made me think about how I treat people." Lauren knelt to meet his gaze, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "It means a lot to me. Remember, it's never too late to start seeing the world differently." As the event wound down, Lauren felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before. The pain of the coffee shop incident had been transformed into something meaningful, something that could inspire others to challenge their assumptions and strive for a more equitable world. That night, as she reflected on the day, Lauren realized that the confrontation in the coffee shop was no longer just a painful memory. It was a turning point, a moment that had set her on a path toward making a difference. And for that, she was grateful. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, Lauren knew she was ready to face them. She had found her voice, and she intended to use it, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed to hear it. The truth came to light, but this story is a powerful reminder of the biases we still face today. What would you have done if you were in her place? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and share this video to keep the conversation going.